Hello and welcome to the Asian game here at the FIFA Women's World Cup. For the very last time, where of course all our coverage is sponsored by our good friends at SMC. After the most remarkable month of football action here in Australia and across in New Zealand as well, we do have a champion. Spain are champions for the first time at the Women's World Cup, defeating England 1-0 last night in front of a capacity crowd at Stadium Australia to end what has been the most remarkable month of football action. When we began this journey with you in Sydney 1 month ago, I don't think anybody could have predicted what this tournament would be and what this tournament would become, especially here in Australia. And of course, the Matildas making it to the Final Four has certainly aided the competition, but the staggering success that we have seen. We've seen attendances smashed. We've seen TV ratings smashed. We've seen ticket sales smashed. Just shy of 2 million people attended this tournament overall. I think 1,978,000 was the official total attendance across this month for an average of just under 31,000 people. That smashes the previous record. It smashes the expectations going into this tournament. I think they were hoping to get 1.5 million ticket sales and attendances. They've gone almost 500,000, 500,000 people beyond that. TV ratings, the TV ratings here in Australia have shattered every record that has been known. The Matildas, when they played their quarterfinal against France, that dramatic penalty shootout victory that they have, Network 7, the free-to-air broadcaster here, registered 11.2 million viewers, making it the most watched program in Australian TV history. Let's just repeat that again. The most watched program in Australian TV history for women's football. I don't think any of us thought that the scale of this would become what it has when we started out on this journey 1 month ago. We knew it was going to be big. All of us football followers, football disciples, if you will, in Australia, kept telling the uneducated, if you want to put it like that, that you don't realise how big this tournament is going to be. And it was so repeated that it almost became a cliche. I don't think us football fans knew how big this tournament was going to be. I don't think any of us thought that Matildas mania would sweep the country in the way that it has. But it hasn't just been Matildas mania, because of course they sold out every game in which they played. That was expected. What wasn't expected was the crowds that we saw along the way for perceived lesser fixtures between lower ranked nations. We had, over 40,000 for Colombia against Germany in one of the most amazing matches of this tournament. Linda Caicedo with, if it wasn't for Sam Kerr, perhaps the goal of the tournament. We had over in New Zealand 34,000 turn up for the Philippines against Norway at Eden Park, which is a remarkable feat when you consider that the two nations involved, hardly heavyweight nations. Norway, of course, have won this tournament, but not traditionally now a heavyweight within women's football, at least in terms of attracting attendances as well. It's been, I keep repeating, but it has just been the most remarkable, successful tournament. And it's elevated the Women's World Cup to a new level, unprecedented levels as we look ahead now to the 2027 World Cup, where we still, funnily enough, we still don't know where that tournament is going to be, which is something we can get onto another day. I'm not sure quite why we end one tournament without knowing where the next one will be held. I suspect it's probably going to be in America, given that they're bidding for the tournament. It's always hard for FIFA to turn down America when they bid for these tournaments, but it has been a staggering success. And what we hope now is that women's football builds on the legacy of this tournament, and you're going to hear that word a lot over the next couple of months, couple of days, couple of years as well. Legacy. What legacy will this tournament leave in terms of what it will leave here in Australia? The Matildas, they were already box office before this. They're bigger than box office now. They are probably the most popular, most successful Australian sporting team of any sport, of any code, of any gender. They have transcended football. They've transcended traditional gender boundaries as we've known them. They've shattered that glass ceiling that has existed for so long. They are icons. As we came into this tournament, everyone knew the name Sam Kerr because she's Sam Kerr. Everyone over the world knew who Sam Kerr was, and that was certainly the case here in Australia as well. But her teammates alongside her were perhaps lesser known outside of the hardcore football circles. That's not the case anymore. Everyone knows Mary. They just know her as Mary. Mary Fowler, Caitlin Ford, Steph Catley, Mackenzie Arnold, Macca as she's now known here in Australia. They are all household names, and it's a little bit like if we go back 17 years to when the Socceroos had their breakout moment at the 2006 Men's World Cup. You had Harry Kewell, Mark Viduka, names that players, that fans knew, but then everyone knew Lucas Neal, Vinnie Grella, Mark Bresciano. For the Matildas, this is their moment. They are now box office household names. They've got Olympic qualifiers, the first round of that coming up in Perth in a month or two's time. They're now talking about moving that from the 20,000 Perth Stadium to the 60,000 Optus Stadium. Such would be the demand for those tickets. Those overtures are being resisted at the moment. I think Football Australia would prefer to play football matches at football stadiums, but such is the demand for this team that you wouldn't be surprised if that did happen at some point. As we look back on this tournament from an Asian point of view, for the first time ever, we had 6 nations at this tournament. Australia and Japan made it through to the knockout rounds. Australia made it to the semi-final. Perhaps Japan should have as well. I've touched a little bit on Australia. Japan, they'll probably feel this was a real opportunity missed because they were one of the standout teams in the group stage and the round of 16 with their win over Norway as well. Coming up against Sweden in the quarterfinals, they went into that game as favourites. Many people expected them to get through and almost even dreaming of an all-Asian final of Australia meeting Japan in the final, which would have been something else. But they left a bit on the table in that game against Sweden. They weren't able to play what we had seen them produce in the opening week or two of this tournament, and they left probably earlier than what we thought they might have. And coming into this tournament, quarterfinal was probably par for Japan, and we spoke about this with Alex Bishop in our preview to this tournament, that perhaps quarterfinal would be about where Japan would land with the experience of the team. And of course they were the youngest, I think it was the third youngest team it might have been at this tournament in terms of average age. So getting to a quarterfinal before the tournament was seen as an achievement and probably about par for Japan, but given what they've produced, it feels like a real opportunity missed to go even further for Japan. China and Korea, the finalists from the last Women's Asian Cup. They may have been the finalists from the last Asian Cup, but I don't think anyone was under any illusions that they're the two best teams. I think Australia and Japan are still generally regarded as the two best teams within Asia. I think generally speaking, they had disappointing tournaments. I think more was expected of them, and I think what we really saw in this is outside of Australia and Japan, the gap that is developing between the rest in Asia and the rest of the world, particularly Europe and North America as well. That gap is getting bigger, and there's going to need to be some work done to reduce that gap, because Korea and Japan in their games, they were disappointing. They didn't show what they were capable of, perhaps until Korea produced that final day for them as it was, final day draw against Germany that knocked Germany out of the tournament. That was finally the Korea that we know is what they're capable of, but still, it wasn't enough. They needed to be able to produce more, and we saw Colin Bell lament the lack of development within women's football in Korea, what he sees as a lack of action from authorities, the Korean Football Association in Korea, to actually develop this team, to develop women's football. He almost pleaded with them time and again that there needs to be investment. They need to invest. They need to invest in the structures. They need to invest in the players. They need to invest in the tournaments, the leagues. Investment is needed right across the board in Korea to take this game to the next level. And I think for China, it's pretty much the same story as well. You know, they've made World Cup finals in the past. They've made the knockout stage of every World Cup in which they've participated. This is the first time they failed to make it out of the group stage. And you'd have to say they didn't deserve to make it through out of this group stage either. They had that win against Haiti, but again, coming in, you'd expect China to win that game. It was probably a little bit more difficult than many expected, if we're brutally honest. The game against Denmark as well, they were competitive but didn't really threaten and look like they would win that game. And against England, they were humbled against a team that was just far superior than them, and 6-1 was probably an accurate reflection. So there's a lot of work to be done in China and in Korea as well, because when they played, I know that we mentioned this at the time, it looked like women against girls, and as I said, that gap is developing, that gap is growing, and there's a lot of work and a lot of investment required to bring that gap down. Vietnam and the Philippines, to round it out, probably not much was expected of those two. They're debutantes at the Women's World Cup. Vietnam put up a better fight than many expected, probably ran out of gas in that final game against the Netherlands, but losing against the US only 3-0, there were a lot of fears that was going to be double digits coming in. So without wanting to sound patronising, that was a great result for Vietnam. They weren't able to back it up, but such is the struggle of women's football in Vietnam. There's not the professional league, the professional environment. It was always going to be a struggle for them coming into this tournament. But the Philippines were one of the great stories of this tournament as well. That win they got against New Zealand, the joyous scenes that we saw not only in New Zealand but back in the Philippines as well, the watch parties, the celebrations, the fact that they were able to bring so many of the Filipino community out for that final game when they had a hope of getting through to the knockout rounds against Norway. Alan Stachich has confirmed that he's leaving. He's confirmed as the coach of Perth Glory here in Australia. So it'll be fascinating to see now what happens with the women's football program in the Philippines. They need to be able to build on this. They've got to get the next coaching appointment right, and they need to build. They need to invest as well. And I think if we look at it now from an Asian point of view, that the biggest thing that comes out of this tournament is the need to invest. Invest in everything across the board. Invest in tournaments, invest in leagues, invest in youth development, invest in infrastructure, invest in the national teams, invest in the coaches. Investment is what is needed if Asia is to close the gap, and there is now a growing gap, as we've mentioned. That's what's needed out of this tournament. There needs to be a lot more investment. We've seen the AFC announce that there is now going to be, starting in 2024, a Women's Asian Champions League, which is fantastic. A fantastic development, because so much of the growth that we've seen in women's football, particularly in Europe, has been effectively funded by the clubs in UEFA as they've invested within their own infrastructure, within their own programs. Clubs have invested within their women's teams. UEFA has invested in the Champions League, and it's become a showpiece tournament now. Asia's been slow to the party in that regard, so it's great to see that there is now going to be that investment put into the Women's Champions League. Of course, it's going to start small. It's going to start on a much smaller scale, but from little things, big things grow, and it can only get bigger and better from here. The other thing that we saw from the announcement from the AFC before the final was that they're going to decouple the Women's Asian Cup and the World Cup qualifiers as well. So the Women's Asian Cup will no longer act as World Cup qualification, which I think is a fantastic move. I think what we need is more opportunities. We see so few opportunities for nations to be able to play against each other. We see it in the men's. They've got that extensive World Cup and Asian Cup qualifying campaign. For the women, all they've really had was the Women's Asian Cup and then a small Olympic qualification tournament, and then not much in between. It's pretty much then up to their own federations to organise friendlies. So by decoupling the Women's Asian Cup and creating a new pathway for World Cup qualification, we're going to see more meaningful matches within Asian football, which can only be a good thing, because these girls, these women, they need more matches. They need that investment, as we've spoken about, and that investment comes from more matches. So we hope that Asia can build on this tournament and build going forward. And in that light, I had the great pleasure yesterday before the final to speak to a member of the AFC Women's Football Committee, Mongoljingoo Sodgerez from Mongolia. She's the International Relations Manager for the Mongolian FA, but importantly for our discussion, she is on the AFC Women's Football Committee, and I had a great chance to speak to her about developing women's football in Asia. Well, Mongoljingoo, thanks very much for joining us here on the Asian Game. It's a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. Can we just start by talking about the tournament as a whole and a little bit more generally as well? Can you believe the success that this tournament has been, and some of the scenes that we've seen play out across both Australia and New Zealand as well, the full stadiums, the packed live sites. Can you quite believe what you've witnessed and what you've seen this tournament produce?
Yeah, so before coming here and after having a meeting by the Australian Football Association, accidentally I was just inviting the Sarah Walsh from Australia to invite my international convention that the Mongol Football Federation made the international convention for the women's football pathway, especially the player pathway for the football among the 10 clubs and hundreds of the girls of the women's football in Mongolia. It was the October of 2021 or 2020. And then that time, I invited a lot of the guest speakers from around the world. And then one of them was the Sarah Walsh. And at that time, Sarah Walsh explained how it's important to host the women's football in Mongolia. And then she explains a lot of the legacy projects. And then later, that time I got the first time about the impression about the hosting the tournament of women's football in Australia and New Zealand. And then later on, I now here and then attended the women's convention and then meeting a lot of the guest speakers and also the experts. And then feeling this, the momentum of how it is important for the women's football, especially the hosting phenomenon, and then raising the high bar of such a tournament in Australia and New Zealand. And then yesterday I got the lecture from the James Johnson, who was the one of the guest speaker in the convention, women's football convention, and then he explains what is the purpose of the bidding, and then later on what's happened just short after for being accepted to host the tournament, and how is the legacy project, and what's the ambition now, and then after collecting such important information and the news about the hosting the tournament in Australia and New Zealand, now I totally see the Sydney totally different from the first day and so far.
Yeah, and we know Australia are bidding for the Women's Asian Cup in 2026 as well. I know you probably can't comment too much on the bid itself, given that process is underway. But given that the staggering level of success that we've seen over the past month, you'd think that would only aid their bid, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so luckily I'm the member of the AFC Women's Football Committee, and then today after this call I have a meeting, and then I saw that it is the one of the agenda item that we are going to discuss today, and since Australia and New Zealand proved that to the global world that they can host such a big phenomenon in Australia and New Zealand. So now they are moving to Asian women's football. So definitely there is no doubt that Australia can host the Asian Cup without any trouble or any issues. But of course it must be approved by the Congress of Asian Football Confederation. So we'll see how it's going to be.
And we know that there's two other nations bidding for that tournament as well, in Saudi Arabia and Uzbekistan. So it does look like for AFC it's a choice between developing and emerging markets in women's football in Saudi Arabia and Uzbekistan, or going with a traditional powerhouse like Australia as well. And I think each of those arguments are equally compelling, whichever way you look at it, because obviously it's important for AFC to develop the game and take it to new markets, but it's also important that the tournament be a success, and that you're pretty much guaranteed to get that in Australia, where you're guaranteed to get big crowds at most of the games, regardless of who's playing. So, as I said, compelling arguments either way. So, either way for AFC, it's probably going to be a win either way for AFC.
Yeah, I agree with you because all the three nations, they all have own unique identities, such as like Saudi Arabia. They are Arabic countries located in the Gulf region, and then if they can host the women's football, um, it's going to be big impact to the society and the community of the Gulf countries that hijab ladies can, play the women's football. And also, the Uzbekistan, they are so active now, hosting the final and final tournaments of the all men and women's tournaments in Uzbekistan in last 2 years so actively. So also Stan countries, that region, they are so suitable for hosting a lot of the tournaments of the Asia. So in Australia now, and then all three are have own unique and the features that to prove that Asian football, especially women's football in the Asia, is so important for them to host.
If we look at this World Cup now, and look at it through an Asian lens, which obviously what we do here at the Asian game, 6 Asian nations participated at this World Cup. First time the Asia's had 6 teams at a women's World Cup. How would you assess the performance of those 6 Asian nations at this World Cup?
The number of the finalists from the Asia is increasing in comparing to the 2015 and so far. So it's so humble for me because I'm Asian, So really want to increase again more Asians, and it's big signal for us, especially Mongolian, because in 2015 when the Japan was so sensational. And at that time, Mongol Football Federation signed a memorandum of understanding with the Japan Football Association to ask the Japanese head coach to come to Mongolia and to be the head coach of our young girls. Because in 2015, there is nothing, I would say there is no any women's league, there's no any female players that they have a clear pathway of they have to play the football in the professional level. And then later on, the 2016, we got the Japanese head coach in Mongolia, and then they started teaching the philosophy of Japanese football in Mongolian soil. And then this was the first moment for us to understand, to acknowledge the women's football in Mongolia. So that's why now I believe, also I met the president of the Filipino Football Association in early of this year. And then he explains that just attending the qualification match of the women's football of the FIFA is also means a lot to them. And then it changed the mentality and the understanding of the women's football. Recently, also people say that we would not say men's and women's football; it could be said as a football. So those nations who are finalists into the FIFA World Cup, Women's World Cup, would change the mentality and the understanding of the traditional concepts of the women's football.
We've seen women's football, particularly in Europe, skyrocket in the last couple of years, particularly since that last Women's World Cup in France. Enormous levels of investment have gone into the game to take it to where it now is. How would you say women's football in Asia has developed at the same time, and how is women's football in Asia generally developing? Do you see it?
The government and also the the culture of playing the women's football are totally changed in Asia, and then thanks to the government support financially and physically to the member associations, and also it's changed that more girls, more women can play in Asia. And then secondly, most of the countries, especially Asian countries, because of the culture change and religion matter, the playing the football, especially by the young girls and women, are not common. So, but recently, that more Asian member association and nationalities who are finalists in the FIFA World Cup change the understanding and the common approach that Asian girls can play the football. So it proves the clear pathway.
Yeah, you mentioned the cultural challenges there. I wanted to talk about that because how significant do you see those cultural and religious challenges are in terms of growing the game here in Asia? Because it seems that those challenges perhaps aren't as prevalent in Western Europe in particular as they have been in the past. A lot of that has been overcome, and there still are significant, cultural challenges to overcome, but they've overcome a lot of it, whereas here in Asia it still seems that a lot of those barriers are up in place. You mentioned you're on the AFC Women's Football Committee, so I'm fascinated in your perspective and how you see the challenge and how significant those barriers and cultural and religious barriers are that still exist in so much of Asia.
For example, in Mongolia, majority of the kids and the parents, especially community, they think that playing the football by the women, or especially young girls, are totally different because they think that it's better that the young girls need to focus on the education and then instead of wasting the time on the field, or they think that playing the football since young age would change the physical feature, and then you need to have more girlish, like watching the fashion TV, and then focus on more different I don't know, it's like some totally different games instead of playing the football. So since 2015 the number of the women's league and the clubs were just 5 or 6 clubs, but now it's increasing since except the COVID year. So it tells that the mental change is important to acknowledge, to adopt new things in Mongolia, and then now parents are started looking at the women's football. That okay, my girls can do that, and especially if the Japan are close neighbor to Mongolia, and also USA, and then those new crowned member associations affect or impact to the parents positively, or sometimes of course the negatively, but mostly they impact that okay, the ladies can play the football instead of let your girl stay in the school and focus on the different things. So it's a good one.
As I said, you are on the Women's Football Committee at AFC. You said you got a meeting coming up after our chat here today. When you do meet as a committee, what are the biggest challenges that you're finding in terms of developing women's football in Asia?
I was appointed since mid of this year, and then I'm totally new member because that the AFC Women's Football Committee was established, founded since earlier, and then been over decades that members are already into the business. So as being the freshman of this committee, I expect a lot of the things that they will adopt the positive decisions to implement the women's football, to grow and increase the women's football in Asia. Generally, I expect that today's meeting will pass the decision to organize the more number of the women's football either in the clubs level and also national team levels, including the futsal and football.
You mentioned there are more opportunities at club level. There was great interest last week when AFC put out their release saying that there will be a women's AFC Champions League coming in the near future. I'm sure that's probably on your agenda for the meeting today, but can you perhaps share a little bit more detail around that in terms of perhaps what that tournament will look like and when that's expected to begin?
Yeah, so it will be equal for either football in the girls, men's and the women. So since AFC has the two major club championship tournaments for the ACC and ACL, the AFC Cup and Champions League. So for us, especially emerging countries like us, are so important because even though the first step is that the women can like the club can be the winner of the local domestic women's league. So what's the next? What's we are going to do? There's nothing. So that's why we exactly need such a platform for the women's club for the futsal and football to be hosted by the Asian Confederation. That's going to be the next step for local the emerging countries like us. That we can do that, and the way it's going to create the ambition for locals. Then furtherly we must play to attending the Asian Women's Club tournament, etc. So this is the totally new concept, and then it will be hosted newly in Asian platform. So I think it's a big demand now because since like Japan, China, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, so there are hundreds of the women who are playing at the club level, and then now it's definitely the time to play in the futsal level of Asia. I mean club level.
We saw at this World Cup as well the Korean coach Colin Bell pleading and almost imploring the Korean Football Association to invest more in their women's football program, to restructure how they go about developing women's football within that country as well. The two teams who made the last Women's Asian Cup final, China and Korea, were both knocked out in the group stage. Only 2 of the 6 Asian nations actually made it through to the knockout rounds in Japan and Australia as well. So where do you see that Asian football still needs to up its game, so to speak, to keep pace with the rate of development that we're seeing across the rest of the world, particularly in Europe? Is it more investment from the member associations? Is it more investment from AFC in terms of competitions and structures as well? Where do you see the biggest challenge and opportunities in terms of developing women's football in Asia?
I think it symbolically it looks like the member association level we will appoint the women's football in charge. That's it. Only one people. But single people cannot do anything. So we need teamwork. For example, at all departments, all the aspects of the football, we need the females and we need the women who always think about the women's football. So if at least we have allocated budget from the AFC and AFC that's supposed to be only solely dedicated to the women's football, at least we can cope with any basic financial issues that's supposed to spend for the women's football. And then also at the human resource level, the gender equality for the appointment or the decision making level is important as well. So even though especially most of the Asian countries have at least like one female ExCom member, but compared to the other ratio of men's dominant decision making part, it's a complicated. Only one single voice raised about the women's football. It's not enough. So in terms of the organizational chart or the compliance matter of the federations, I really want to change the main policy of the member associations, such as like increasing the female decision makers at the decision making level, or to add more people who are in charge of the women's football at the implementing level. And then since you said that the Korea already proved that if they are in the direct way or correct way of the changing the structure, they can show the world that women's football can play in Korea. So that's what this is the point I want to say, that we need to change the structure level and also implementing level.
Well, there certainly are some big challenges ahead for women's football in Asia, but that's where we have to leave things for today. Mongoljingoo, thanks very much for joining. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Enjoy the rest of your stay in Sydney. Enjoy the final tonight. Good luck with your meeting after this one. Hopefully there's something constructive to come out of it. But yeah, thank you very much, and wish you all the best with the work that you and the rest of the Women's Football Committee are doing in terms of developing women's football in Asia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and then it means a lot for me to know and knowledge sharing and learning new things from my colleagues of the football. So thank you, and then enjoy tonight's match.
It was fantastic to speak to Mongoljingoo, and we certainly hope that the investment that she talks about is forthcoming right across the board in all countries, big and small, across Asia, so we can push this game forward, because Morocco should be the inspiration for many people come out of this tournament. But not just Morocco. There were so many so-called minnow nations who surprised us all. It was Jamaica, South Africa, Morocco. We saw Brazil, Germany get knocked out, but we saw Morocco, South Africa, Jamaica make it through to the knockout rounds. And it comes, particularly in Morocco's case, we've spoken so much throughout this tournament as we've tried to shine a light on women's football across the continent, the cultural barriers that exist, particularly in West Asia, because that's the next frontier. That women's football in Asia is dominated still here in the East. All 6 nations that competed at this World Cup come from the East. The next frontier is trying to develop and grow women's football in West Asia, and there are so many barriers that still need to be pushed down and broken. And Morocco, for the Arab world, needs to be the inspiration. They've invested in their team, they've invested in their structures, and they reap the rewards for that at this tournament, making it through to the knockout rounds, when I don't think anyone thought that was possible coming in. So I think that's the greatest takeaway as we finish up looking back on this Women's World Cup, is that while this tournament has been incredible and it's been amazing, and it's taken the women's game to stratospheric levels that I don't think that we thought were going to be possible coming into this tournament, as we look ahead now to the next 4 years, the next 8 years, it's taking it to an even bigger level, and that comes from investment. It comes from believing in the product. It comes from believing that women's football is the equal of men's football, and if this tournament hasn't proven that to the people that are in the positions of power, then quite frankly they need to get out of the positions of power and let those that do believe in it get into those positions and make the change that needs to happen. That is where we're going to leave things. It's been a remarkable month covering the Women's World Cup. From me, from everyone here at the Asian Game, our entire team that's worked tirelessly across the tournament. We had people, Michael Church was here, we had Alex Bishop, Ryan Phoenix over in New Zealand as well, Manasi Patak, who filed for us as well. And we've had people from right across Asian football get involved in helping us make this coverage possible. None of it would be possible without the immense support of our sponsors, SMC. They were tremendous in supporting us in Qatar at the Men's World Cup. They jumped on, they believed in what we were doing, and they've supported us again throughout this Women's World Cup. And the numbers that we're seeing is truly remarkable. I spoke at the start about the numbers that this tournament received. The numbers that we're seeing in our coverage, it's almost double what we're able to achieve in Qatar, which is a testament to everyone that's watched, that's everyone that's listened, to everyone that's engaged with us. And it just shows the appetite that exists for women's football within Asia. So if I can leave on a final note, it's to believe in women's football, believe in the product, and as we look ahead to the next 4 years, if I can give a plea to everyone involved in football across Asia, to every member association, it's invest. That is what is going to take Asian football forward. It's investment across the entire spectrum. It's investment in facilities, it's investment in the players, investment in the leagues, investment in all of the structures that surround women's football. That is what's going to take this game forward. And what we've seen here in the last month has shown what is possible when you do invest and you do believe. So for the final time here at the FIFA Women's World Cup, it's been a pleasure to bring our coverage to you. We'll be back with normal resumption of the Asian Game podcast. We've got the AFC Champions League beginning very shortly. The playoffs for that are already underway. Football continues across the board. We're seeing what's happening in Saudi Arabia with the big names going there. We'll be back with our regular podcast over the next couple of weeks, but signing out now here at the FIFA Women's World Cup. I've been Paul Williams. It's been a pleasure to bring all of our coverage to you over the last month. It's bye for now.